And welcome in everyone to this week's episode of Craze's Corner. Zach and I are here to break down our consensus top 10 wide receiver rankings. So you definitely want to stay tuned for that. We have Will and Jeff's rankings as well, but unfortunately they're not here with us tonight. So we'll definitely be making fun of some of their rankings, especially Jeff's. Definitely some controversial things he's got on there. But first, we got a couple of news stories we want to break down for you. Cowboys wide receiver Michael Gallup has not been placed on the PUP list, meaning he will have a chance to play each of the first 4 weeks. So this is great for the Cowboys, Dak Prescott, and all of them in general because, as I said, he won't have to miss the first 4 weeks. So there's a chance we could see him week 1, week 2. So this makes him more valuable in your fantasy football leagues. You don't have to worry about trying to stash him on your IR spot if you have IR spots. Unfortunately, Gus Edwards did land on the PUP list, meaning he will be out the first 4 weeks. Currently, talks at Ravens camp are that Mike Davis will probably see majority of the workload week 1, with J.K. Dobbins currently working his way back from injury as well. So that'll be a situation to monitor, possibly a streaming candidate week 1. If you go 0 RB and you need someone to start, plug in and play, he should get the volume. And our final news story is Mike Gesicki is reportedly, his name is being tossed around in trade talks. The Dolphins, they played him for a majority of their preseason game last week. They're trying to use him more as a blocking tight end, and that's not really where he excels. He's more of the receiving tight end. So we'll see how this situation unfolds. You can let us know using the media app what you think about this. Jeff has been working super hard and has just launched the new version of the media app on the App Store. So you guys should definitely go make sure you check that out. Media with 2 E's. Search it up on the App Store. Download the app. You'll be able to ask any of us questions that you want to. So you can reach out to me on there. Zach, Jeff's on there as well. So you can reach out to any of us. Ask us some fantasy football questions, anything to do with fantasy football. We'll gladly answer them. And with that being said, let's bring Zach into this here. Welcome in, Zach. How are you doing?
I'm well. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing pretty good. What are your thoughts on these Mike Gesicki trade talks? Are you hoping your team trades him, or you want to keep on a hold of him for this year?
I guess it all depends on what the market for Mike Gesicki is. So, if we can get something back from losing a draft pick this year or next year rather, I mean, I guess that's always good. But I would like to see Mike Gesicki play this year. I think there's been a lot of chemistry between him and Tua that kind of just goes under the radar. But it just he's not a consistent player, and he's playing on the franchise tag. It seems like it's just a not like I don't know. Time's up for Gesicki, and Miami is what it feels like. But yeah, it's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, I agree. Whether or not he plays for them, he will be a good tight end somewhere for fantasy. Thank you. So we'll see whether they keep him there or they move on, because the likelihood of them signing him to an extension is pretty minimal. So if you can get a draft pick for him now, you might as well. But let's get into the big topic of the show. We have our top 10 wide receiver rankings. As I mentioned before, Zach, Will, Jeff, and I have combined our rankings, come up with a consensus top 10. If you watched last week's show, you would have seen our top 10 running back rankings, and you would have realized that none of us agreed on anything during that show. But this week, I think Zach and I will be able to agree on a couple more things. So you definitely want to make sure you stay tuned to the end. There's a couple guys that some of us had in the top 10s that didn't quite make other people's. So it's going to be an interesting show for sure. But number one, Zach, this is a guy you ranked as your number one overall wide receiver. I have him as my number one overall receiver as well. So does Will, and Jeff has him at 2. Jeff's obviously sleeping on Justin Jefferson. Justin Jefferson, 23-year-old wide receiver who's gotten better in each of his past 2 seasons. 1,400 yards in his rookie year. He had 16 last season with 167 targets. I think that target number could go up. And to me, the important thing is his touchdown numbers went up by 3 last year. And I think that's a number that could get into that, 13 to 15 range this year. And I think that's the big difference for him going into this season is that I think the touchdown numbers will be there in this new offense that they've brought over from the Rams. So I think that's a huge thing. And hopefully Kirk Cousins can just do what he's always done, just enough to keep his fantasy football wide receivers relevant. Zach, you have him ranked as your number one wide receiver. Why do you think he's going to be the wide receiver one?
I like the third year wide receiver, kind of like complete elite breakout. I think we're all confident that Justin Jefferson is one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. But for so long, we were putting guys like Davante Adams up there, and kind of the shift in the wide receiver position. Now you look at it, it's a totally different cast of characters, really. Even just the top three right there. You can make the argument Justin Jefferson was up there last year too, but it just seems like the trajectory or for his career just kind of seems to be steadily improving. He's so young still. Kirk Cousins he does nothing but be a top 12 quarterback every single year. And if you figure Adam Thielen is kind of aging, people are kind of lower their expectations for what his 2022 season is going to look like. You have to imagine that Jefferson is probably going to take even more targets away as far as the target share for this Minnesota Vikings team. So for me, it's the age combined with the upside, and just what he's proven so far. Wide receiver 4, wide receiver 6, just in his 2 years. So even if he just continues that trajectory, he'll be wide receiver 2.
Yeah.
And then if you draft him as your number one even if you draft him as the wide receiver 1 and he finishes as wide receiver 2, you're still going to be happy with what you get from Justin Jefferson this year.
Yeah, absolutely. As you said, wide receiver 4 and wide receiver 6. He's gone up in each of the past 2 seasons, so I expect him to do the same now. He's one of the best wide receivers in the league, definitely top 3 in my opinion. And the age is extremely important. He's really explosive, and he can make the plays with the ball in his hands. So I think that's something that he brings to the table, as opposed to some of these other guys. Cooper Kupp is our wide receiver 2 in our consensus rankings. Will, you, and Jeff all had him at 2. I have Cooper Kupp at 3 in my rankings. Cooper Kupp last year had his phenomenal 1,900-yard season. He finished as the wide receiver 1 by far. Why do you think he's going to be the wide receiver 2? And why don't you think he repeats as the wide receiver 1?
Man, that's a tough question, honestly. And really, I'm kind of just making a hypothetical reasoning for why I'd be choosing Justin Jefferson over Cooper Kupp, because he had literally the greatest wide receiver season, right, of all time, if not one of the greatest wide receiver seasons of all time. So from that perspective, he should be 1. But I think with the addition of Allen Robinson, with a healthy Cam Akers, an aging elbow lingering injury with Matthew Stafford, I can see where Cooper Kupp, maybe he's still a top 3 wide receiver, no matter how you look at it. But just for me, I'm just going to take the age. That's really what separates. I think the 3 of these guys right here, age is the biggest factor.
Yeah, I agree. He's 29, coming off that massive season, as we said. Matthew Stafford is older, and that is something that definitely needs to be taken into account with his elbow injuries. From personal experience and what I've heard, he can play through this injury. It'll just be painful. So we'll see how he manages that throughout the season. To me, the biggest difference is that Allen Robinson is coming in and he's going to demand some of those targets, as well as the fact that, Sean McVay is going to do everything he can to bring Odell in come November when he's fully healthy. So I'm expecting that as well. With the, healthy running game, a worse offensive line, it was the perfect storm for him last year. And I think this year he's still going to be great and he's going to get the targets. And he's going to be, top 5 in targets again. But I think the touchdowns might come down a little bit. Not sure he'll get 16 touchdowns again, averaging almost a touchdown a game. I just see some natural regression. You really can't go up from being one of the best wide receiver seasons of all time. So natural regression, I think, puts him around 3.
And just before, I was gonna say, just before we move on from Cooper Kupp, just my own personal, we did the launch league last week, and he was actually my first round pick at pick 9 in a 14-team league, because all of the running backs, just kind of got gobbled up. I think literally all besides Justin Jefferson, I think I was just looking at Cooper Kupp, and I think that's the scenario where you look at him as even if you want to take him as the wide receiver one off the board in drafts after all those running backs go, you can certainly do worse. And the way I'm looking at it, it's like, hey, no matter how I finish out my draft, which I didn't feel too confident in, I made sure if I had Cooper Kupp, I just got to load up on some solid running backs if I can. But yeah, Cooper Kupp, man, he's just a stud. I love him.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's a pretty safe guy too. It's not like he's going to go out there and put up nothing for you,
Right.
in comparison to some other guys that we're going to name. So he definitely is a good pick there, and there is a pretty good chance he could repeat on what he's done. So we will see. Just to me, natural regression would have him falling down a little bit. We don't normally see the wide receiver one repeat multiple times in a row. But we'll see. The next guy is the guy that Jeff has ranked as his number one wide receiver. If you paid attention way back, he was the guy who I had number one in our way too early rankings. I have him ranked at 2 still, Zach at 5, and Will at 7. Comes into an average of 3.75. This can be Davante Adams, new wide receiver for the Las Vegas Raiders. He gets a new quarterback, which is definitely a downgrade for him, but he's still on a good team that projects to score a lot of points in one of the toughest divisions in the league. I think that connection with Derek Carr is something that's going to be extremely important. He will be the best red zone target Derek Carr has ever had. Zach has been one to bring up Derek Carr's touchdown numbers, never having more than 32, but I think this could be the year he surpasses that number. He probably won't surpass it by too much, but he'll surpass it enough that Davante Adams can be in that 12 to 15 touchdown range, in my opinion. He had 169 targets last year. I think that number will probably come down a little bit, but I think he'll still be over 150 targets, and I think he's going to be very efficient on the field because now the defense can't just focus solely on him with Hunter Renfrow and Darren Waller there. So that is something that he didn't have really in Green Bay over the past couple seasons. It was kind of just Davante Adams. And Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams just went to work every week, no matter who was on him, how many people were on him. Davante Adams has got, he's one of the best route runners in the game, and what he can do with his feet is absolutely outstanding. He always finds a way to get open, and he's great in the red zone. So for me, this is a guy who, in my opinion, is the best wide receiver in the NFL. So I have him at 2 just due to the fact that he doesn't have Aaron Rodgers throwing in the ball anymore. Otherwise, he'd be my wide receiver 1. Zach, you have him at 5. Obviously you think this is a little bit of a downgrade in comparison to Aaron Rodgers, but what are your thoughts on Davante Adams?
It's just nice that he finally has a good quarterback to play with. Finally free Davante Adams has come true. No, even if you look back, I think it's the 2016 season. I mean, what a great season that was. I mean, 12 touchdowns, 121 targets, 75 receptions, almost 1,000 yards. It still is only wide receiver 10 in PPR, right? So it's like, I just don't know that Derek Carr can even come close to the production support, right? Like what the quarterback, like obviously the receiver can't throw the ball to himself. So, I just don't know how there's a world where Derek Carr just suddenly 6 years removed from his career high in passing touchdowns, which is only 32. It's like, I don't know what we're really going to expect. And it's like just simple math. Like what's everybody expecting Hunter Renfrow to score for touchdowns this year? What would you say if you just let's just go down the list of the other targets as far as touchdown receptions?
6.
6 for Hunter Renfrow.
Yeah.
Darren Waller, how many you got?
Probably around the 6 range as well.
There's 12 right there for those two guys. Let's say, obviously Kenny Drake's gone, so let's talk about the running backs. I mean, Josh Jacobs has never had a receiving touchdown in his career, so it's hard to imagine that he did. So maybe he's good for 1, and then the rookie probably, the rookie.
I don't think Jamarr will get any. I think Amir Abdullah probably have a couple.
So there you go. So there's 3 from the backfield. So now we're at 15 touchdowns with just the other
15,
guys.
I think around 15 from Adams, push you around 30. And you get the other wide receivers and everything. Like I said, I think he'll break that 32 mark. I don't think he'll break it by much, but you give 5 other touchdowns throughout the other wide receivers, tight ends, and such. And
even still, 15 touchdowns would be his second most in his career.
Yeah.
And it's Aaron Rodgers couldn't support 15 touchdowns certain seasons for Davante Adams. I just can't imagine. Maybe I'm just downplaying how good this team could be, but it is no knock against Davante Adams. If he would have went to a handful of other teams, he'd still be one of the top 2 wide receivers in my opinion. Just because it's Derek Carr and the low touchdown volume, and that's really where Davante Adams makes his bread and that's where his money is. It's the end zone. No one can cover. Like, he's so good with that quick twitch off the route with those moves. It's almost unfair. So I guess that's an argument in Derek Carr's favor. Whereas, like, as long as he can just place an accurate ball, I mean, Adams can get open. So
Yeah.
I guess how you view the Raiders offense this year is really how you probably view Davante Adams in the rankings.
Yeah, so I went game by game for my record predictions, which you can find on my Instagram. But when I went game by game, I actually had the Raiders winning 14 games, so I kind of had to tone that down a little bit because I don't think they're a 14 win team, but I think they are an extremely talented team, and I think a lot of people are over-hating on them. They play this year, obviously their division, which is going to be high-scoring 30-plus point games for the majority of them. And then they play the AFC South, which, lacks a little bit on the defensive side of the ball. The Jaguars, the Texans, the Titans, and, the Colts, maybe they have the best defense at all those teams, but no one's really scaring me to lock up Davante Adams.
That sounded like that's not the easiest schedule, but I can see where.
There's going to be points, right? They're going to have to put up points.
True.
Even if they don't put up points, they're going to be behind in games. They're going to be throwing the ball. And then they play the NFC West, who is another team. They're going to have to put up points to win. So they're going to be either throwing from behind or they're going to be putting up those points. And when they put up points, Davante Adams is going to see a lot of those red zone targets. So I do believe in this offense. I think Davante Adams will be the centerpiece. Hopefully Derek Carr and Josh McDaniels don't burn me. They definitely could. But
not 2 guys that really want to take their word to the bank. So, but yeah, no, I can see a world where the Raiders don't have 6 losses in their division, which is what I'm kind of projecting them to do, to be totally honest. When they play the other 3 teams, I can't imagine they walk out of those 6 games with any less than 4 losses.
Yeah, they definitely could. I just think, I think they'll probably win 3-3 in the division.
Yep.
And that's where I had their 3 losses coming from. I had them beating everyone else on their schedule, but I, gave the Rams a couple extra a win there and a couple other teams. But yeah, I think that their offense should hopefully take a big step forward this year, bring in an offensive-minded head coach. John Gruden's gone.
Mm-hmm.
Josh McDaniels just needs to, do what he did in New England for so long with Tom Brady. Just bring that kind of aspect. Give Davante Adams that Randy Moss type role. And that's what we need to see from him to get this. Jeff got him as the wide receiver 1 just because he wants to see someone prove it. That he's not the best wide receiver in the game. Typical old head stuff that Jeff would bring up.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. It checks out.
Yeah. And even though he's the one who drafted all the rookies in that launch league that we did, but
Agree.
I think Davante Adams will be good. But let's move on to our wide receiver 4. Zach, you and Will both have him at 3. I have him at 4, and Jeff all the way down at 6. We're going to be talking about Jamarr Chase here, the Bengals wide receiver 1. Finished at PPR 5, standard 3 last year. So average those out. You get 4, which is exactly where we have him. I see his target numbers going up a little bit, and I see the big plays and those touchdowns dropping. Last year, we saw Joe Burrow scrambling around a lot with their terrible offensive line. And because Jamarr Chase and Joe Burrow had that connection, he was just able to find him on those long bombs wide open with no one around him. I think those plays are kind of cut down this year. I've been saying that all offseason, and I think it will with this improved offensive line, which means the touchdowns will come down. But I think his targets go up, which keeps him around that wide receiver 4 finish. He's electric. A year younger than Justin Jefferson. So, there's a lot that can go right for him. I just can't quite see, he had 13 touchdowns last year with 17, almost 18 yards per catch. That 18 yards per catch number has got to come down.
That's outrageous.
Unless you're Marquez Valdez-Scantling and that is all you do. That number definitely has to come down. So that's my biggest thing, is that the touchdowns and the yards per catch will definitely come down. And then the targets will go up, so he'll be better in PPR than he was last year. But what do you think about Jamarr Chase?
Another LSU product that is arguably top 3, and depending who you talk to, maybe top 2, maybe top 1. So you're looking at a guy that's just going to continue to excel. I mean, he's another guy that's still super young. I mean, the rookie season was just incredible. But even the connection, like why are we even going to say that the connection is going to go away? Like, why is this offense going to take a step backwards? The offensive line only got better. I mean, we're like, I say this almost every time we talk about the Bengals, but they have 2 top 15 wide receivers. You know, not every team has that. So clearly the offense is trusted amongst the whole entire fantasy community to produce enough fantasy points for 2 wide receivers to be drafted that high. So I have to look at it from that angle. Whereas, you know, we talk about second year, third year wide receivers. Maybe we haven't even seen the full potential of Jamarr Chase yet. And this is a guy that took a year off from football on top of it. Just came back and said, yeah, I'm just going to easily be the best, you know, rookie, you know, out of this whole group. But, you know, hands down.
And as when he was in college, when he played at LSU with Justin Jefferson, he was by far the dominant wide receiver 1 on that team.
Right.
And we've seen what Justin Jefferson did in his second year in the league. So the sky is the limit for Jamarr Chase. Just that Super Bowl hangover kind of worries me a little bit. We've seen it, you know, literally every year, unless your name is Tom Brady. It seems to affect your team. So I'm just a little bit weary of that. But like I said, I think he's still going to be a wide receiver 4. So I think he'll be good. He'll be good. Just
he's not bad at football.
Yeah, he's good at football. Definitely good at football. He would be in that category. Another guy who is good at football, Stefon Diggs, comes in at number 5 for us. Will and Jeff have him at 4. I have him at 5, and you have him at 7. So we are the lowest on him out of the 4 of us. I expect Stefon Diggs to have a good year. I'm just expecting some other weapons to emerge out of Buffalo this season. Gabe Davis is supposed to take some steps forward. Isaiah McKenzie, they brought in Jameson Crowder. James Cook is now there out of the backfield, supposed to be catching some passes. And then you get their tight ends there, Dawson Knox and OJ Howard. I just think there's a lot of mouths to feed, which is why I have him at 5. I think he'll probably go up a little bit from where he was last year. He only had 103 catches, which was down almost 20 catches over the previous season. So he brings that number back up, and he'll be right around that 5 mark for me. The touchdowns will be there. They're in either. If you don't think they're the best offense in the NFL, you probably have them second. And this is a pass-first offense. You know, we got the Dolphins fan over here, but they're a pass-first offense. Their running backs don't scare me. So Stefon Diggs is an elite wide receiver talent with arguably the best, you know, young quarterback in the league throwing him the ball. You can't go wrong with Stefon Diggs. I think he's extremely safe. What do you think about Stefon Diggs? You were the lowest on him out of everyone. Is that just because you're a Dolphins fan?
That is 100%. I'm a Dolphins fan. No, this guy he's great. I mean, I'm not trying to, again, when you get in this, you know, area of wide receivers, this is not a knock on these guys. It's more so just the idea of, I don't know, just trying to hedge my bets. And I'm looking at a guy that's 28 years old. You mentioned it, that there are other targets and other viable options. Gabe Davis, again, another guy, depending on who you talk to, could be a number 1 breakout candidate for some people. And we want to we want to diminish what he did in the playoffs last year, as if he didn't have 4 touchdowns, like in an NFL playoff game. Like, I don't know, like, no, just forget about that. And it's like, what? I mean, how many people have gotten 4 receiving touchdowns in a playoff game before? And you talk about Josh Allen being one of the, you know, most prolific quarterbacks. I mean, I can see why people are so high in Stefon Diggs, but he was only wide receiver 7 last year. And I just don't know why he would be. I mean, can anyone really predict that he's just going to get so much more involved? Or like the receptions are going to go up that much? You know what I mean? Like he's going to continue to get that 160 mark of targets and be that efficient on them and have a high touchdown like unlike Jamar Chase, who hovers around 17 YPC, you got a guy like Stefon Diggs who hovers around 7 to 9. So he's really just a, I don't know, mid level or midfield receiver. He's not like a field stretcher, in my opinion. He's more of a guy that can take it. I don't know. I just get the bias in me as a Dolphins fan too. Definitely hinders the ranking, but just can't.
Yeah, so
I can't see him going any higher than 7.
yeah, so as we talk about all these negatives, these players, you have to remember they're still in our top 10, so it's not like we are hating on these
Right.
guys.
Right.
We still like them. The thing, as I said before, he dropped 24 receptions last year, but he only had 3 less targets than the previous year. So that's where I think that number comes back up a little bit. That is, a big range there if you only lose 3 targets, but somehow you miss out on 24 receptions.
Yep.
That can make a big difference in your ranking. So that's where I don't think he'll be more involved. I think he'll be around that 160 target range again, which to me puts him around this wide receiver 5 range. I just think he's going to be more consistent than a lot of the other guys we're going to talk about. And I think that's something that definitely is valued, in my opinion, when I'm doing these rankings. It's not necessarily, he's going to score this many more points than the guys behind him, but you can play him week in, week out. And unlike this next guy, he won't put up 0 for you. And this next guy is Mike Evans, notorious for putting up, very, very small numbers when he plays the Saints twice a year. So definitely want to make sure you have someone to play that week if Mike Evans is going up against the Saints. But he is Tom Brady's number 1 weapon. That's really all you need to know about Mike Evans. Last year, he was the wide receiver 6 in standard and 9 in PPR. He only had 114 targets because they have so many weapons, but he had 13 touchdowns. He's never had a season below 13 touchdowns from what I see throughout his career. So that's a number that is probably going to remain around the same, and he's never had a year with under 1,000 receiving yards. So outside of playing the Saints, he's another model of consistency. The only worry is he's now 29, so we'll see how his age catches up to him, but he's going to be good for 1,013 again this year, which to me makes him a top wide receiver. Jeff had him at 5. You have him at 6, Zach. I have him at 7. And he did not even make Will's list. So what do you think about Mike Evans this year?
I think that we're going to have to discuss this with Will off air. I think that you said the model of consistency, 1,000 yards, just book it every single year. If he doesn't do it this year, it'll be the first time ever since putting on an NFL uniform. 13 receiving touchdowns, improved on that to 14 receiving touchdowns. And now you figure he improved on that number with throwing up a couple zeros on top of the fact that he was playing with Antonio Brown and Chris Godwin and Gronk.
Mm-hmm.
Take away all 3 of those options, at least for the first couple weeks. He's an absolute steal in drafts. I can only imagine that Mike Evans is one of those guys that has been on a billion championship rosters because year in and year out, you can get a perennial 1,000 yards, 10 touchdown average wide receiver in the back end of the second, even times the early 3rd round in certain drafts.
Yeah. And like you said, Gronk's not there. Godwin's definitely going to miss at least the first week, if not more. They bring back Leonard Fournette and they added Russell Gage. But week 1, they're playing the Dallas Cowboys, and we know Trayvon Diggs is known to give up some massive plays. So don't be surprised if Mike Evans puts up 30 points week 1, just to come the next week and drop nothing because he's playing Marshawn Lattimore and the Saints. So, week 1, he will be one of the starts of the week for sure. You're going to make sure you want to have him in your roster.
They played week 1 last year, too.
Yeah, they did. They played Dallas Cowboys week 1 last year.
That was the Thursday night opener.
And he had 3 points in that game. So hopefully he does better than
it was Chris it was Chris Godwin and Ceedee Lamb that scored touchdowns, I think, in that game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. So we'll see how he does, but he's, a locked in wide receiver top 10 for sure. So whether you have him, 5, 6, 7, unlike Will, who apparently
13.
he's just preying on Tom Brady's downfall. We've heard about that for the past couple years. He will continue to prey on Tom Brady's downfall, and apparently he's taking that out on Mike Evans now. But let's move on to a guy who is on the upward, that upward spectrum, as we talked about a couple of these other younger guys. Ceedee Lamb. Zach, you have him at 4. I have him at 6. Will has him at 10. And he just missed Jeff's list from talking to him earlier. A guy who finished as the wide receiver 13 in standard, 19 in PPR last year. He loses Amari Cooper in that offense, so he gets an uptick in targets right away. Mike Gallup, we talked about him a little bit earlier. He might be ready for week 1, probably not. And if he is, he won't be 100%. This is in an offense that we know Dak Prescott's probably going to put up 5,000 yards. And CeeDee Lamb is going to see majority of those yards out of all the wide receivers there. I think this is going to be his breakout year. He's never had more than 120 targets in his previous 2 seasons. I think he eclipses that number by far. And I think that 6 touchdown mark from last year also goes up, which to me isn't extremely well. I just drafted CeeDee Lamb in our Fantasy Football Launch League, which you can check out on the network's YouTube page. I drafted him at the end or at the beginning of the 3rd round in that 14-team league because, as Zach said, running backs were just flying off the board like crazy. I was extremely happy that he fell to me there because I think that's a great value to get a top 10 wide receiver, a guy who I think has a huge ceiling. Dak Prescott he's proven he can support a wide receiver 1, and he can support a lot of stats. He's been great for fantasy since he came into the league. So I got him as a steal, and I was able to take him away from our resident Cowboys fans. It made Kyle and Corey pretty happy there that they didn't get their chance to get some CeeDee Lamb. But Zach, you think he's going to be the wide receiver 4? Let me know why.
The pure target share. I know that Dak Prescott is not really, even the Cowboys in general, not really known, but maybe besides like a Des Bryant, for having just like a one wide receiver or super targeted one guy. But I do think with the departure of Amari Cooper, Tolbert, is Tolbert injured, if I'm not mistaken?
I think he's fine. I'll have a look while you continue talking.
So I think there's already some like shakiness with the wide receivers that he's going to be playing alongside with Michael Gallup. Not really sure where he's going to be, and he's coming off of a kind of a somewhat, tough injury to recover from. But I think this is a 3rd-year breakout candidate right here. CeeDee Lamb just has to improve on the touchdowns. It's really what it is. You love the YPC 12. I think he's hovering right around 13 or almost 14. I think he can double the 6 touchdowns. And with that would easily, punch him right into the top, at least I think top 8 wide receivers. And I think some of these guys over here too, like you want to at least land somewhere in that area. And a guy that's played 2 16-game seasons probably has a better chance, of returning on the draft capital versus, a guy that's or like a guy like a Mike Evans even that's just going to drop a 0 on you every now and then. I don't think CeeDee Lamb's putting a 0 up ever. No. And on top of it, I think he's just only going to improve on every stat category from last year. He's just such a good player. And I think we really underestimate how good Amari Cooper really is as a wide receiver 2 alongside of you. So
well, don't worry. Jeff made sure to put Amari Cooper in his top 10. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, as you said, he should see an uptick. And from what I saw, Tolbert is not injured, but he's still a rookie coming into the new offense. He's had a couple catches in each of the first 2 preseason games. So
who
definitely something.
Who did they lose to injury? Wasn't there someone that went
James
down
Washington?
That's who it was. Injury. James Washington.
He's out for about 6 to 10 weeks.
Yep.
So yeah, there's tons of opportunity for CeeDee Lamb to eat up all of these targets. Our next wide receiver is another consistency guy. Keenan Allen comes in as our consensus wide receiver 8.
The consistency
Will
guy.
has him at 6. Jeff at 7. Zach at 9, and he did not make my top 10. This is a guy who finished as the PPR wide receiver 10 last season. He gets the targets. He's got one of the best young quarterbacks throwing him the ball. They're in a pass-heavy system. The touchdowns at 6 last year. He was 8 the year before that, but 6, 6, 6, 4, 4, 8 previous seasons. So 6 is probably around where I have him projected for touchdowns. I'm just not sure his targets will continue to go up. He was at 157 last year. I think that'll probably come down to around the 140 mark. And he just missed my top 10 just due to those facts that the touchdowns aren't quite there for him. He's not that monster in the red zone. They have another wide receiver for that. He's not their big play guy. They have another wide receiver for that. And as Josh Palmer and Mike Williams continue to emerge in this offense, Austin Eckler out of the backfield, and they brought in Gerald Everett. They have Donald Parham at tight end. So they have lots of targets. And that's really what Keenan Allen has made his name on, is just getting the targets and being an extremely good route runner. But as I said, he's never been that touchdown guy. So that's why I'm just a little hesitant to bump him up any more than where I currently have him. Zach, you have him at 9. What do you want to add about Keenan Allen?
It's hard for me to rank anybody that's guaranteed 100 receptions any lower than that, just especially when you start I think it's the idea of the guys that are left to rank after that, where it's hard for me to how am I going to put Keenan Allen behind these guys, even if he lands back to his 6 touchdown, which is he always does. I think even when he had 8 touchdowns, I think he was still only wide receiver 14. So I can see the argument of why he wouldn't be in the top 10 because he just doesn't finish in the top 10, except for when he is wide receiver 10. So at the same time, I can see some of those Austin Eckler crazy touchdowns, maybe couple go to Keenan Allen, and maybe with that, couple touchdown uptick with an continuing improving offense and a team that throws the ball on 4th down every time. I think you kind of like the wide receiver 1 for Justin Herbert. You got to imagine is always going to be top 10 valuable for fantasy.
Yeah, it's going to be just a question of whether or not he stays as that wide receiver 1 when it comes to fantasy behind that. So we will see. We'll talk about another one of their wide receivers in a little bit. But let's move on
to
Deebo Samuel here, the wide receiver running back. You can play him wherever at least the 49ers can. You can now that they've made him just a wide receiver. But with my hesitancy here is just all due to the fact that Trey Lance is now their quarterback, not Jimmy Garoppolo. So I have him ranked at 8. Will has him all the way up at 5, and Zach, you have him at 10. He didn't make Jeff's top 10. If he wasn't going to make anyone's top 10s, we'd expect it to be Jeff. He finished as the wide receiver 3 last year on the back of 8 rushing touchdowns. I think that number is due for regression. He had 6 receiving touchdowns, which could go up a little bit with those rushing touchdowns coming down. He had 59 carries last year, which is probably another number that's going to come down. That was kind of just some hyper due to all the injuries that they had in that backfield last year. And I know that they started getting more involved in the end of the season in that running game, but I don't think that's something that they're going to do all year. But they got him the ball in the red zone when it mattered. And that's something I like to see, and that's definitely why he's still in my top 10. He is the guy I drafted in that launch league as well to pair with Ceedee Lamb and Christian McCaffrey, just the way the board fell. So I ended up with 2 guys that we have in our top 10 for wide receivers. So that's definitely something that I like there. But yeah, just Deebo Samuel, he's a great wide receiver. He's great out of the backfield, as we saw last year. Just the efficiency and the fact that Jimmy Garoppolo is no longer his quarterback, I think, are the 2 biggest things that scare me. Zach, what do you think about Deebo Samuel? You have him at 10.
Oh, you mentioned those guys that you grabbed because of the way the board fell. Just make sure that no boards fall on those guys because they'll be done for the season. the blue tent boys. And it's man, look at Deebo Samuel's game log and try to formulate some sort of
consistency.
He's all over the place. And I mean, granted, he only played 7 games the season before last, but it's I don't know. How do you bank on that efficiency, man? He was basically a running back last year, just playing the wide receiver position. I mean, talk about you think the 8 rushing touchdowns is going to regress. I mean, if it doesn't, then Deebo Samuel is just he's just different than what we've ever seen. I don't know if a wide receiver has ever gone back-to-back seasons with 8 rushing touchdowns. That
probably not.
That kind of sounds insane. And you mentioned Trey Lance too. I think that's the biggest downgrade for Deebo as far as what the type of player Deebo is. That you basically take that all away. You have a dude with a cannon who can scramble. doesn't sound like that's going to necessarily benefit Deebo. And also Brandon Ayuk is still around. And it just seems like he's one of those like late bloomer kind of wide receivers
Mm-hmm.
where he or like a post hype sleeper wide receiver. And if he has the connection with Lance and Lance is doing all the scrambling and taking a bunch of rushing touchdowns away or just rushing opportunities in general, I don't know how you see Deebo Samuel. Like, what else do you, what other evidence do you have to prove that he could even, I mean, I'm making the case against him even being in the top 10 because realistically, other than last year, he's not even a top 30 wide receiver. So,
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, and we mentioned all those names there for the 49ers, and you didn't even bring up George Kittle,
right.
who's an absolute monster on the field. So he only had 120 targets last year, which I think is probably around where it'll be again this year. It's not like he was hyper-targeted at any point.
Right.
It was just that rushing work that really set him apart and made him that wide receiver 2
I mean,
last
it's
year.
77 receptions.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anybody else that he finished in that like category or like that group of guys last year. If you look at the top 10 wide receivers last year,
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine the receptions are all triple digits at least.
Yeah, so that's perfect segue to our guy who rounds out our consensus top 10 wide receiver rankings. A guy who had 87 receptions in 2 years of his career and managed to finish as the wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2 in those years.
Wow.
But unfortunately, this guy has changed teams, and his quarterback situation isn't quite as good as it once was.
I'm up.
And that's going to be Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill is ranked at 8 for Jeff, Will, and Zach. And he did not make my top 10. He was just outside. He was 11 for me. Just
Unacceptable.
you give him the ball and he will make plays. But I don't see that touchdown number that we saw the last few seasons, 15 and 12 in those 2 seasons where he only had the 87 catches, which is huge. He had 9 touchdowns last year. I would probably say he'll probably be around that, if not a little bit lower. Probably around 8 touchdowns is where I have him. He finished as the PPR wide receiver 6 last year with 159 targets. I wouldn't be surprised if that number drops a little bit too. He doesn't have that same connection that we saw him and Patrick Mahomes had when those scramble drills came. Tyreek Hill was always Patrick Mahomes' first look down the field, and I'm not sure we get that same connection with him and Tua. That's just something that you either have or you don't have. That's what we saw with Davante Adams and Aaron Rodgers for a long, long time, and that's what we saw with Tyreek Hill. Patrick Mahomes, as we saw with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, I just don't think him and Tua will have that same connection. They could, but I think it's something that's definitely risky. He had his career high in receptions last year as well, with 111, and he only finished as the wide receiver 6. And with those touchdowns going down, will he have 111 receptions again? Probably not. He'll probably be down around that 90 mark like he was before, which would still be his second highest throughout his career. He's a freak when you get him the ball in open space, and he can make guys miss. I just can't see those special plays that we saw him and Patrick Mahomes connect on all the time translate out into this Miami Dolphins offense. But I still think he will be a top 11 wide receiver. So if you're playing in a 12-team league, he'll still be a wide receiver 1. Just couldn't quite get into my top 10. Zach, you have him at 8 as well as Will and Jeff. Why do you think he's going to crack that top 10?
Because he's Tyreek Hill. And I think we're just downplaying how good him and Tua are going to be. I'm just all in at this point. I really think it's going to be something. And I think to your point of him having the highest reception and becoming more of a PPR guy last year, that's perfect for him to kind of like continue that pattern in Miami where he doesn't necessarily have to be a. And a lot of those plays with Patrick Mahomes, like we talk about that connection, a lot of those plays, it was just Tyreek Hill just making a play. It wasn't necessarily the person throwing him the ball. I mean, yes, of course, I'm not trying to downplay Patrick Mahomes. He's so much better than at this moment right now. He is so much better than Tua. He's arguably the best quarterback in the NFL. Don't hear what I'm not saying. What I'm
He's
saying is
Tua is a better quarterback than Patrick Mahomes, just like Tyreek Hill said.
Run the headline. What I'm saying is a lot of the times it was Patrick Mahomes doing his crazy magic, just like throwing up a ball, and Tyreek Hill having the bunnies to just go up like 10 feet in the air and go up and grab it, even being kind of a smaller stature guy. So I
Mhm.
think he's still going to be able to do that in Miami. And I think that he has a pretty solid. I don't know if he's had a running mate that's not a tight end, as obviously Travis Kelsey, but Jalen Waddle running alongside of him. Like, how many defenses have the speed to keep up with all of these wide receivers every
And
single
running
game?
backs.
I mean, we play the bum Jets twice, we play the bum Patriots twice. We have a relatively easy schedule. You're gonna see the Dolphins just absolutely manhandle the Lions live. So I'm happy for you to be able to
Yep.
see that. So I just don't know any scenarios where Tyreek Hill just takes this drastic step backwards when I don't know, he's just so good. But
Yeah, well,
I
like I said, I have him at 11, and that's not a drastic step backwards. As I said, he
that's
loses a
unacceptable.
touchdown. He loses a touchdown or two and, loses 10, 15 targets.
Right.
Dropping down a few spots is definitely something that can happen in an offense that I project to score less touchdowns than the Chiefs' offensive last year. So
So
don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying he's
yeah,
gonna fall off.
you saying less than 9 receiving touchdowns?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah,
You think he's gonna have less than 9 receiving touchdowns?
I think 10 is, we're going to look back and say that was a really good season for him, because I think he had like 15 the year before. So it's not like he's not capable of getting into that double digit range. It's just a matter of how much I mean, just at the end of the day, the Dolphins, if you just look at how many receiving touchdowns they had last year, you have to imagine that Tyreek Hill is just essentially going to assume some of those, right?
Yeah. Well,
So,
you look at Jalen Waddle, who had a great season for you guys last year. He only had 6 receiving touchdowns. So
right.
Tyreek Hill will probably top that number by a little bit, but I
And,
think
and
10
let's
is
let
it's not out of the range of possibilities. I'm just saying,
no, I trust me. We're not too far.
yeah.
We're a few spots away. So I totally agree. But I just think we got to remember too. We also started like 1-6 last year.
Yeah.
I don't see that happening this year. I can see it as being more of a 4-2, or whatever the record, whatever the weeks were. If we were 1-6, that's 7 weeks or whatever. So I think in that scenario, we can have a better 7-week stretch where our offense is a little more prolific. And I think, our coach, we didn't even talk about Coach McDaniel. I think he really brings just that edge. I mean, look what he did for Deebo last year. Can we have
Mhm.
this? Everyone's talking about, he's bringing Deebo to Miami. He's the new Deebo, Tyreek. If he's used in any sort of way like that, I think Tyreek Hill is a better athlete than Deebo.
Mhm.
So
So looking at your schedule here, I have you guys starting out 1-3.
beat the Patriots.
Yeah, I think you beat the Patriots, lose to the Ravens, Bills, and Bengals.
Right.
So it'll be not quite as bad as 1-6, but 1-3 is still not great. You'll probably beat the Jets the next week.
I don't know. See,
But
we smoked the Ravens last year. We don't have to get too far into the Dolphins though.
yeah,
We
yeah,
continue
yeah.
on.
But yeah, just saying, I think he's gonna be good. I just don't expect him to replicate the touchdown numbers he put up with the Chiefs.
Fair.
So we have a couple more guys to talk about. Guys that Zach will be able to get in on, as well as me. So I have 2 guys left that were in my top 10. All of Zach's guys, I think, for the most part, have been talked about. So we're going to talk about Courtland Sutton here, who Zach has at 11. I have him at 9, as well as Will has him at 9. To me, Courtland Sutton is going to be Russell Wilson's wide receiver 1. He's going to see a massive uptick in touchdowns over last season with 2. He's going to see an uptick in targets. They're going to be more valuable targets than Drew Lock and Teddy Bridgewater. And he's a guy who I believe is very talented. I think he is the best wide receiver on this team. And with that being said, Russell Wilson has shown us that he's going to provide a wide receiver 1. And I think it's going to be Courtland Sutton. So he is a guy that I think brings that big play ability, but also those, every game targets where he's going to be consistent. So I have him at 9. What are your thoughts on Courtland Sutton?
Yeah, I kind of look at it like he's Russell Wilson's wide receiver 1. So, and every year for past few years, DK has been top 12, or at least top 15. So if you just kind of look at it from that perspective, we're just kind of plugging and playing Courtland Sutton to that wide receiver 1 role, which could backfire, because let's not act like Courtland Sutton has this glamorous resume like DK Metcalf actually does. So it could be a total, like, something we look back and just be like, wow, like there's always been players in fantasy history. I can't think of any off the top of my head, guys that for some reason just snuck into this top elite, not really elite territory, but I mean, you talk about potentially top 12 wide receiver, that's kind of elite. So
Mhm.
these guys kind of sneak in there every now and then because we make up like an anecdotal, you know, uh, case behind what they're going to be for this upcoming season just because of a free agent or a trade or things like that, with Russell Wilson. And it could totally backfire, and KJ Hamler could be the best wide receiver, or Jerry Judy. But if I guess I had to gamble on who resembles the alpha wide receiver archetype, it would be Courtland Sutton. And he has flashed in the NFL, unlike Jerry
Mhm.
Judy, who hasn't done anything. He's just a floppy fish. And that's it's what it feels like. But yeah, I mean, a career high of 6 touchdowns for Courtland Sutton. That has to go up this year.
Yeah.
Just if he just stays healthy and plays at least 14 games, I
Mhm.
can't see how he doesn't come down with at least 8 touchdowns.
Yeah, I agree. I think he'll be in the double-digit touchdowns. If everything goes right for him, I think he'll be probably top 10 in wide receiver touchdowns. If everything goes right, there's a lot of questions around everything going right for him, and what does everything going right even look like to be what Russell Wilson's wide receiver one.
Mm-hmm.
So there definitely is a lot of questions there. Let's move on to a guy that Jeff had ranked at 9, AJ Brown. Tough. I know you're a big Jalen Hurts believer in comparison to me. I don't have him in my top 10 for quarterbacks. I just think that his numbers will come down a little bit in the rushing game. But AJ Brown is definitely a big upgrade for him at wide receiver. I'm just not sure Jalen Hurts can sustain a wide receiver one there to make him finish within the top 12. He's only finished within the top 12 in PPR once, and that was 2 years ago when he finished as the PPR wide receiver 12. And now he's, in my opinion, in a better offense with a quarterback who is better at throwing the football. And Ryan Tannehill, especially in that play action game that he ran perfectly with Derrick Henry. So I just can't see Jalen Hurts coming out and proving to us that, he can support an alpha wide receiver one. And I don't think that AJ Brown's going to set career high in targets, which he's probably going to need to do in this offense. He's career high in targets is 106. And in comparison to all these other guys we've been talking about in the 150s, 160s, 106 is, not very easy to get you into that top 10. His career high in yards is 1,075. That's a number that's got to come up if he's going to finish in this spot, because I don't see him getting to that 11 touchdown mark where we saw him when he finished as a top 12 wide receiver. And a lot of those, as I said, his yards per catch, 20 his rookie year, and then 15 the year after that. That play action system that they ran in Tennessee was perfect for him and Ryan Tannehill to connect on some of those longer balls. I just can't see Jalen Hurts being able to replicate those passing numbers. He's a guy who only had 16 passing touchdowns last year. So if AJ Brown is supposed to get, 11 again, that only leaves 5 for these other guys. Obviously, I think that number will go up a little bit, but I just can't see him sustaining a wide receiver one. What do you think about AJ Brown, Zach?
Well, I think the one thing we should also kind of like not forget and also kind of take into consideration that Jalen Hurts and Ryan Tannehill aren't so different. So it's not like he's going from a complete, statue quarterback right to a Lamar Jackson kind of scenario. And yes, Jalen Hurts definitely is probably the most run happy quarterback in the NFL. But at the same time, Ryan Tannehill has always been known to be more of a mobile quarterback, and he has a pretty like relatively good resume when it comes to being a rushing quarterback as far as like touchdowns, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like it's too much of a drastic change. And I think the best year that like AJ Brown had was also the same year that Corey Davis was so good. That last year, Corey Davis was still in
Mm-hmm.
Tennessee. They both had a pretty good season. So he's also able to thrive next to another wide receiver, even on a low passing like that. Tennessee Titans definitely not one of those like
That was Derrick Henry's
pass
big year.
happy. Right. That's not a
It
very
was
pass
all of
happy
their big
offense.
years.
Right. So if we look at it from that perspective, AJ Brown it's still there's still a pathway to him finishing in this territory. just like the Derek Carr, Davante Adams things, it's all about how you view the offense and that quarterback. There's a lot of guys who are down on Jalen Hurts who don't really take him seriously as a quarterback. So if you're in that camp, chances are you probably don't believe AJ Brown has what it takes or has the opportunity to even crack this territory of wide receivers. But for me, I think he's in a spot where if you're going running back heavy in your draft, chances are you're going to be looking at AJ Brown. I want to say if you go 2 running backs, you can probably still scoop AJ Brown in the 3rd. I want to say.
Yeah, so looking at his current ADP, I'm just trying to pull that up.
It just if it seems a little rich, or for me
Right
personally,
now,
I don't know if I'd buy it in the 3rd round.
so here you go. Consensus between Fantrax, Roto Sports, and Sleeper. His ADP for the wide receiver category is that wide receiver 9. I don't have him top 10. You don't have him top 10. Jeff has him at that wide receiver 9 where his current ADP is, but I could never see myself grabbing him there
Wow.
because I think there's a lot of guys behind him.
And that's all scoring types. That's not it's not like standard. Because I could
that
see
that is standard where he excels.
right.
So
So yeah, that's maybe why he's in 9th. What about PPR? Do they show
11.
P? Okay, so he's a
And
little
he's
more in
11
line.
and a half.
Yeah, so he's a little more aligned to where I kind of have him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's still a beast, and he's still super young, and there's no running game in Philadelphia
There
to
is a
where
running game. It's
it's
Jalen
Jalen
Hurts.
Hurts, right? So unless he continues that ridiculous rushing pace, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, he broke records last year. Like we talked about it before, he became one of 3 quarterbacks to rush for a certain, like rush over 700 rushing yards and have 10 in a double-digit rushing touchdown season. Your boy Cam Newton was one of them, and Kyler Murray. So he's an elite quarterback, but I guess it's all about how you feel about the Eagles' offense.
Yeah, I'm just a little down on the Eagles' offense in comparison. The Eagles don't trust Jalen Hurts, so if the Eagles don't trust Jalen Hurts, why should I trust Jalen Hurts? That's my stance. I think is a downgraded situation for him. But let's move on to a guy we brought up earlier that Jeff has in his top 10 for some strange reason. Jeff thinks Jacoby Brissett is about to support a wide receiver 1 in Amari Cooper, a guy who played 15 games last year in a much better offense with a much better quarterback and finished as the PPR wide receiver 27. Had 103 targets last year. Amari Cooper had 8 touchdowns last year as well, on top of all of that. So he had good touchdown numbers. And he played 15 games, and yet he was still the PPR 27. He gets a downgrade at quarterback for the first 11 games at least. Who knows what Deshaun Watson's going to be when he gets back. I'm hoping he's going to be good. I have Amari Cooper and Deshaun Watson in our startup dynasty league that we did. So I'm really hoping that this pairing works out next year. But for this year, I don't see a way Amari Cooper ends up near this top 10 that he's only finished in once. What do you think?
He won't finish top 10, but he will most likely win somebody a championship if Deshaun Watson really does come back week 13 against the Texans. I mean, it might be right there, week 13. He might be, if you're brave enough.
He might be a wide receiver 10, week 13 on.
Exactly. So, and you only have like 3 other weeks left for the fantasy season at that point. So if you're willing to basically burn a 4th round pick on Amari Cooper or 5th round pick, wherever he's going ADP wise, that's you. That's on you, and you should really trust those other draft picks that you took before him to last the whole season, because Jacoby Brissett is not only going to not support a top 27, like he's not even going to support a top 30 wide receiver. I can see this wide receiver core just being completely non-fantasy, even in the realm of just like wanting to start anybody. Will Amari Cooper have a 2 touchdown game sprinkled here and there? Of course he will, but on a per game basis, you are not going to want to have Amari Cooper on your team, because you are not going to be happy when you play the Steelers twice a year, play the Ravens twice a year, play the Bengals twice a year. Like, all
that
of those...
Eli Apple guy is pretty bad, so maybe the Bengals one isn't so bad.
Right. But yeah, it just doesn't seem like the ADP, I cannot see how he returns that value unless when Deshaun Watson comes back, he has like a 4
4
touchdown
touchdown.
game every single week to
Yeah,
round out the playoffs, which you who knows, but
he
you're
could.
right, even with Deshaun Watson coming back, you're still asking a lot from a guy who looked horrendous in preseason, coming off an absolute nightmare of a past year and hasn't played football in what will be almost 2 years at that point.
Mhm.
So to depend on that is just
Yeah, it's
crazy to me.
crazy. Like, this is if Watson comes back and he's good to start the season. We watched
Right.
Watson play in his preseason game and he looked awful.
Right.
So I think it's going to take some time, and that's why I said when I drafted them, they're for next year. These aren't guys I'm expecting to win me anything this year. I'm just hoping and praying that next year my team comes together in that league. But you look at Jacoby Brissett last year with the Dolphins. I think it was last year when he was throwing to Myles Gaskin 10 times a game.
Right.
And he was supporting Mike Gesicki as a top tight end, and that's something I could see happen in this Cleveland Browns offense. They're going to run with Nick Chubb a lot. They're going to bring Kareem Hunt in the game.
Kareem
And
Hunt.
Jacoby Brissett is going to throw the ball to Kareem Hunt. David Njoku is a great tight end. He's going to see his targets. And Amari Cooper could end up being, come the time Deshaun Watson gets in the game, the second or third target on this team when you actually look at the numbers. I won't be surprised if Kareem Hunt has more targets than him. And David Njoku probably would be a stretch, but I wouldn't be surprised if Kareem Hunt is the leading target on this team by the time Deshaun Watson comes back. So that's just lots of caution with Amari Cooper. I wish Jeff was here to, explain, give us that Jeff explanation that he always does. He's like, okay, guys, let me tell you why.
Yeah.
But, let's move on. We got one more guy to talk about. We talked about his teammate earlier. I think his teammate is going to out-target him with Keenan Allen out-targeting Mike Williams. But to me, Mike Williams has this ability to break those long plays that we saw last year. He has those boom weeks. He has those inconsistent weeks as well where he puts up smaller numbers. So do I think he's going to be a guy you're going to be happy starting week in, week out? Probably not. But he finished as the standard 9 PPR 12 last year. I think he continues to get a few more targets. I won't be surprised if he's in that high 130s range. He had 129 last year. He had 76 receptions last year, 1,100 yards, and 9 touchdowns. I'm not going to be surprised if Justin Herbert supports him as a double-digit touchdown guy. He had double-digit touchdowns back in 2018, and I could see him doing that again. Like I said, I don't think he's going to out-target Keenan Allen. I think he will outproduce Keenan Allen just to deal with his yards per catch being anywhere between 15 and 20 throughout the last 4 years of his career. And having Justin Herbert as your quarterback who throws an amazing deep ball to one of the best deep ball wide receivers in the league. Just something I like a lot. He's going to be a high volatility guy. He's going to win you your week, or you'll have to have the rest of your team pull his weight. So if you compare him with a real consistent Stefon Diggs, Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson, and get him as your wide receiver 2, or even if you just make him as your wide receiver 1, if you go running back heavy, and then you have those running backs to kind of withstand some of his worst weeks. Last year, as I said, he finished as the wide receiver 12. And he still had a few weeks. Let's count these up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 games under 10 points. So if he cuts that number in half, he's going to be way higher than where I have him at 10. He's going to be a great wide receiver. He's just got to cut down on some of those, as I said, 8 games with less than 10 half-point fantasy points. And he finished as the wide receiver 12. So I think natural progression, he will improve upon that wide receiver 12 finish. What do you think about Mike Williams?
As long as he plays 16 games, you're good. If he's played 15 games or less in three of the other seasons, and the highest finish was wide receiver 39. So he's got to play basically the entire season to even finish in a range that you're going to be not completely upset with. But that double-digit season was with Phillip Rivers. And last year it was all front-loaded, right? Didn't he get almost 80% of those touchdowns within the first 4 weeks? The first
He
5
did have,
weeks?
because he had 6 touchdowns through 5 weeks there. And then he finished the season off with back-to-back touchdown games as well.
Yep. So again, this is one of those guys on a game to game like pace. You're not going to be thrilled to have Mike Williams, and depending on how your wide receiver core looks, and this is kind of what always happens with me with Mike Williams, he's always on that fringe of like, am I flexing him or is he potentially getting benched? You know, like he'll give me a dud week back to back. And then now I have to worry about, flexing him. But then it's like the whole idea of like he's on such a great offense with a great young quarterback. And you know what Mike Williams' ceiling is. He's a first-round draft pick, pedigree. So he's just a frustrating player to own in fantasy. Unless you had him last year, most people probably don't have a great view on Mike Williams fantasy-wise.
Even if you had him last year, you probably don't have a great view on him because
you
said it was front-loaded, and then
he let you down when you probably needed him the most. Mm-hmm. Exactly. So if you have a guy like that who fizzles out on the back end of the season when you need him the most,
Kyler Murray,
and you have injuries along the way, it's just that like the cumulative of the season of things you don't want to happen. You don't want injury-prone guys, and you don't want guys that just disappear when you need them the most. And I think that's kind of where Mike Williams falls. If he doesn't have close to double-digit touchdowns, he's not going to finish anywhere within the top 20 wide receivers.
Yeah, like I said, I think he will get to double-digit touchdowns. But I said you have to make sure you build your team around the draft of Mike Williams. You can't have an extreme. You can't pair him with a bunch of guys that are just going to put up random numbers every other week where they're going to be inconsistent. You need a team that's going to be able to support those down weeks because he had 8 last year under 10 points, and that's not something you want out of your wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2. I just think you'll look back on the season next year, and he'll probably have cracked that top 10. Even though it will not have felt like he cracked that top 10, he will have. You'll be annoyed if you own him all year, but if you go against him and he has one of his big weeks, you're probably losing that week. So,
yep, he'll do it.
Polarizing player, but that rounds out all the guys we had in our top 10. So I hope you guys enjoyed. You can check out the previous 2 weeks' shows, which was quarterbacks and running backs. You'll be able to check out Zach's new show that's coming out soon. Zach, I'll let you talk about that for a minute here. Introduce your show and tell them about your first episode that's coming out.
Yes, sir. It's called Catch the Wave. It'll be on the Fantasy Football Network, just like this wonderful show is. You'll see our trusty host, Zach, hop on and talk some prop bets with me, and you get to see is the inside thoughts of a Carolina Panthers fan and where he's willing to put the money when it comes down to his fandom. So you definitely want to check it out. We don't have an official air date yet, but it'll be within the next few days. I'll have a little something drop. Maybe we won't even do like real promotion. This will be the promotion right here. Whoever watches this. Other than that, it's gonna appear, and you're gonna love it.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be great. And as Zach said, I'm on it this week to talk some Panthers, but I'm gonna be back on it week to week, just talking with whoever we bring on. So it's gonna be a great show. If you like me, you like Zach, you like this show, you'll definitely like that show, especially if you're into those prop bets and sports betting, because that's kind of what that show is based off of. So you definitely want to check that out. Check us both out on Instagram at Ocean State FF for Zach, at Pro Football Craze for me. Check out his merch. He's got his merch on right now. Wave Shop.
Yep. Shopwaveandanchor.com.
There you go. Check that out as well. And as I said earlier, check out the media app now. You'll be able to ask Zach and I questions directly from the app, and we can respond to you directly. We can post it to all of our social medias. You guys will be able to post it to all of your social medias with just a push of a button. We will be able to ask you guys questions as well. And then you can respond to that. Exactly. So definitely check that out. And I hope you guys enjoyed this show. We might not have a show next week, but we will be back before the season starts. So make sure you stay tuned again for that. And check out some other shows on the network next week. Maybe next week, instead of watching this, you tune into Zach's show and watch that during your regular scheduled time you'd be watching this. But thanks for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed.
Yes, sir. I forgot that I'm the one recording here.